I'd just like to really start where Judith left off. I mean, when Judith said about the quote from Frederick Douglass that power concedes nothing without a struggle, you could add that really when you look at power after many years where there hasn't been a struggle, in lots of cases, they take more and more from people. They don't just say, oh, we've got enough profit, like British Gas, which saw the price of gas fall just at the same time as it put our prices up by 15%. They don't say, oh, we won't charge people that because lots of people with kids can't afford to pay any more gas bills, or lots of old people can't afford to heat their houses and are going to die of hypothermia. They keep putting the prices up, and even though the prices have gone down, their prices won't go down. Or take the example of Northern Rock, which this week was nationalised, at least temporarily, by the Labour government, in an act which the Tories regard as something close to revolution and cutting the Queen's head off, but actually has only been done in order to ensure the profits, if not of Northern Rock, of the other banks that they fear will go under if they don't do it. And they said the most amazing thing about Northern Rock. They said, well, Northern Rock now is a much safer bank than any other banks. It offers better rates of interest. It offers safer mortgages to people. That's an unfair advantage over all the other banks. Now, when you hear this, you realise how crazy the world is. Why shouldn't every bank be a safe bet for people who want to either borrow money to get a house or who want to put their savings into a bank? Why shouldn't every bank be like that? But no, they want to introduce the market, because to introduce something safe for people, to guarantee people a house, enough food, enough clean water, electricity, all these things, is something which would buck the market. Now, in my opinion, the job of socialists should be to buck the market in any way that we possibly can, because I believe the market is not only blind to what the needs of people are. It doesn't care about the needs of people. It doesn't care that you can work and work and work, but at the end of the week, if you produce too many goods, you'll be thrown out of work. It doesn't care, for example, that although there's a shortage of housing in London, there's a very acute shortage of housing in London, there is actually also a glut of one-bedroom expensive flats in London, because the people who might want somewhere to live can't afford $250,000 and rising. I mean, $250,000, 350,000, 450,000. Therefore, this year, they will build 250,000 houses in this country, but as the housing experts say, there aren't 250,000 people who can afford to buy them. Now, that is the market. And what that leads to is misery, is overcrowding, is homelessness, and all these things. And there has to be a solution to this kind of problem. And we live now in the 21st century, when capitalism has been on this earth, for better or worse, for something like 200 years, where we live in a country which is richer than it has ever been, where it has a bigger population than it has ever had, when it has the capacity to produce more wealth than it's ever done before, and yet inequality is growing greater. And inequality is growing greater because that is a product of the capitalist system itself. As long as capitalism exists, not only will there be profits, not only will there be accumulation, there will be this gap between rich and poor, which will grow wider. And that is what the system is really about. The other thing that you get when you have a system like this is you get different forms of inequality. I mean, I think it's incredible. We've had a Labour government now for nearly 11 years, and this Labour government, the Home Secretary yesterday made a speech where she attacked immigrants, and where she said that immigrants who come to this country have to learn the language and mustn't get involved in crime. Now, I guess that most immigrants who come to this country don't want to get involved in crime and do want to learn the language. They seem perfectly reasonable things to want to do. Indeed, most immigrants who come to this country do learn the language as well as their own language or languages, and therefore they're much better at speaking languages than most indigenous British people. Indeed, the British people who go and live in Spain and France are notorious for not learning the language of the country that they go to. And I wonder what would happen if the Spanish government said to the 750,000 British people who've settled there because they like the sunshine and cheap booze and are too ignorant to read the planning regulations in Spanish, so they have to keep getting their houses knocked down. I wonder what people would say if the Spanish government said these British people will have to leave if they don't integrate and live in their own little colonies and refuse to learn the language or eat lots of food with olive oil in it or any of these kind of things. I guess there would be uproar in the Daily Express and everywhere else. Now, this is what we are faced with as well. We have not just inequality in terms of wealth, we have inequality in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of nationality and all these things. And these are quite deliberate. They're not an accident in this world. They are part of a means of dividing and rule. That if you don't have a decent house, the easiest thing in the world is to blame your neighbour who you think doesn't work as hard as you, or has got one bedroom extra, or has got one child less than you. This is what they do to people, and they do to people all the time. And therefore, we live as well in a very brutal society. Capitalism was born in brutality. Capitalism was born from the slave trade. It was the first means by which the capitalists accumulated enough wealth by stealing people from Africa, taking them to the West Indies and to America in order to work for nothing, in order to make profits from the sugar plantations, the cotton plantations, and all these other kind of things. They were born out of this brutality, and they have maintained this brutality, not through overt slavery, but through a form of slavery in what is called wage slavery, that we all have to go to work in order to live. But what we get in our wages, and what we get in our pockets, it barely covers the cost of our living, but it certainly doesn't amount to all the wealth that is produced. The vast majority of that wealth is kept as profit by a small number of people who own the factories, who own the offices, who own all these other kind of things. And therefore, as long as capitalism has existed, there's also been socialists. For something like 200 years, there's been different sorts of socialists who've campaigned for the kind of things that we're talking about tonight, for equality, for justice, for everybody to have the same income, for the gap between rich and poor to eventually disappear, for everybody to have the basics of life. And as we know, because as Judith said, if the three of us had as much wealth in the world as quite a few of the poorer countries, we probably wouldn't, if we're going to be perfectly honest, be doing a meeting here in Oxford House talking about these things. I would be probably drinking champagne somewhere a few miles down the road. The point is that we are all sitting here in a room talking about why that is still the case. Why, whatever the hopes of our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, we still live in this divided world, and we still live in a world which in many ways is getting worse. I mean, we only have to talk about the threat of war and the threat of global warming to see this isn't just an economic brutality, bad as though that is. This is also an existential crisis, if you like, as to the future of humanity and the future of the world, and whether or not our children and our grandchildren survive in any kind of way. And therefore, very, very big questions. Now, a lot of people who come to the meeting tonight, I guess, have come from the different movements and the different campaigns that we've organised against racism, against the war, the campaigns around respect, where we've got a whole number of councillors in Tower Hamlets, where we've fought for an electoral alternative to Labour, and I think an electoral alternative to Labour is very, very important, which is why on May the 1st I hope everybody here will campaign to make sure that we do as well as we possibly can. And people have come out of those campaigns. I mean, I feel like I've known Alice for a fantastically long, probably a long part of her life anyway, if not a long part of my life, because Alice was a school student in 2003, and she's been campaigning against the war for, well, that's 5 years already, and that is a long time, and people have achieved a fantastic amount about the movement, but we still have the Labour government holding our wages. We still have the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. We still have, I mean, the fact that people talk about Barack Obama being the next president of the United States, an extremely rich senator in the United States who happens to have a black skin, and this is regarded as something absolutely remarkable, how many years after slavery was supposedly abolished in the 1865 was abolished in the United States of America, but people still think, and indeed somebody said to me, Obama will never win because the Americans will never vote for a black person. Now I hope that is wrong, and I think it may well be wrong. But nonetheless, the fact that we're talking about all these things in the 21st century tells you how far we have to go. And therefore, it's not just a question of us campaigning and organising and struggling and all those things. All of those are the absolute first essential of what we do. We have to belong to trade unions. We have to be part of the campaigns that go on. We have to fight every day